He was the kind of man who never backed down from a challenge. Rashid Al-Mansouri, heir to a telecommunications empire worth billions, had built his reputation on calculated risks and impossible victories. But when his arrogant cousin dared him to marry a woman he'd never seen, a blind African woman selling handmade jewelry outside a Dubai shopping mall, he had no idea this impulsive decision would unravel everything he thought he knew about power, pride, and the depths of human resilience. The wedding night revelation would shake him to his core and change the trajectory of two lives forever. This is the story of a dare that became destiny, a marriage that began as mockery but transformed into something neither of them saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The marble floors of the Burj Al Arab's executive lounge gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Rashid Al-Mansouri adjusted his platinum cufflinks, his dark eyes scanning the contract spread before him. At 34, he commanded respect in every boardroom from Riyadh to Singapore. His telecommunications empire, Mansouri Global, had revolutionized connectivity across the Middle East and North Africa. Yet tonight, surrounded by the opulent luxury that had been his birthright, he felt the familiar sting of emptiness that no amount of success seemed to fill. Another merger, his cousin Tariq sneered from across the leather sofa, swirling his whiskey with deliberate disdain. "Tell me, cousin, when was the last time you did something that wasn't calculated to the decimal point?" Rashid didn't look up from his papers. Tariq had always been the family provocateur, the one who inherited money but never responsibility. "Some of us have empires to run, Tariq. Not everyone can spend their days collecting vintage cars and causing scandals." "Scandals?" Tariq laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. "At least I live, Rashid. You've become a machine, all business, no soul. Even your engagement to Yasmin, purely strategic, isn't it? Her father's oil connections, your telecommunications network. A perfect merger disguised as marriage." The mention of his fiancée made Rashid's jaw tighten. Yasmin al-Zahrani was everything his family expected: beautiful, educated, from an impeccable lineage. Their wedding was scheduled for next month, a grand affair that would unite two of the Gulf's most powerful families. Yet Tariq's words struck closer to truth than Rashid cared to admit. "At least I don't make a fool of myself chasing every adventure." "That crosses my path," Rashid replied coolly. Tariq's eyes gleamed with mischief. "Adventure? You wouldn't recognize adventure if it danced naked in front of you. You're so controlled, so predictable. I bet you've never done a single spontaneous thing in your entire life." "I've taken risks you couldn't imagine. Business risks. Don't count, cousin. I'm talking about real risks, heart risks, the kind that make you question everything you think you know about yourself." Rashid finally looked up, irritation flickering across his features. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Tariq stood, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Dubai's glittering skyline. "I'm suggesting you've forgotten what it means to be human. You've insulated yourself so completely from real emotion, real connection, that you've become nothing more than a very expensive robot. And you have a solution to this alleged problem? A dare." Tariq turned, his smile predatory. "Since you're so confident in your ability to handle any challenge." Rashid leaned back in his chair, intrigued despite himself. "I'm listening. Tomorrow, I want you to go to the gold souk, not the exclusive dealers you usually frequent, but the street level. There's a woman there. I've seen her several times. She sits outside the main entrance, selling handmade jewelry. She's—" Tariq paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's blind, African, beautiful from what I can tell, but clearly struggling. What does this have to do with your supposed dare?" Marry her. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Rashid blinked, certain he'd misheard. I'm sorry? You heard me? Marry her. Not some elaborate courtship, not a business negotiation. Walk up to this woman, propose, and marry her within the week. If you can do that, if you can take a risk that has absolutely nothing to do with profit margins or strategic advantage, then maybe you'll remember what it feels like to be alive. Rashid stared at his cousin, searching for the punchline that never came. You're insane. I'm engaged to Yasmin. I have responsibilities. Responsibilities to who? To a family that sees you as a profit center? To a woman who sees you as a business opportunity? When was the last time someone looked at you and saw Rashid the man, not Rashid the empire? This is ridiculous. Even if I were interested in your juvenile dare, which I'm not, I can't simply marry a stranger. There are legal implications, family expectations, excuses, Tariq interrupted. All I hear are excuses, but that's fine. I understand. Some people are built for safety, others for adventure. There's no shame in knowing your limitations. The casual dismissal hit its mark. Rashid had built his reputation on never backing down from a challenge, on taking calculated risks that others deemed impossible. To be called safe, predictable, it stung more than he expected. What would you get out of this? Rashid asked slowly. Tariq's grin widened. The satisfaction of watching my perfectly controlled cousin do something completely irrational. Plus, I've already told the family about my certainty that you'd never take such a risk. If you prove me wrong, I'll eat my words very publicly. And if I refuse, then I'll know I was right about you, that underneath all that success and power, you're just a very wealthy coward who's forgotten how to feel anything real. Rashid stood, walking to the window where Dubai's lights sparkled like earthbound stars. Below, millions of people lived their lives, took chances, made mistakes, felt joy and heartbreak in equal measure. When had he stopped being one of them? When had his life become so sanitized, so predictable? There would be conditions, he said quietly. Name them. If I do this, and I'm not saying I will, it would be legitimate. Not a mockery, not a game. If I marry this woman, I would honor that commitment completely. I wouldn't expect anything less. Rashid turned back to face his cousin. And you would publicly acknowledge that you were wrong about me, in front of the entire extended family. Deal. They stood in silence, the weight of the dare settling between them. Rashid thought about Yasmin, about the perfectly planned wedding, about the life mapped out before him like a business proposal. Then he thought about the woman Tariq had described, blind, struggling, alone in a city that rarely showed mercy to the vulnerable. 1 week, Rashid said finally. 1 week for what? To decide whether I'm going to do this or not. Tariq laughed, but there was something almost respectful in the sound. You're actually considering it. I'm considering a lot of things lately. The next morning, Rashid found himself walking through the gold souk, the familiar weight of his Italian leather. Shoes foreign against the worn stone paths, he'd told his driver to wait at a distance, not wanting to arrive in his usual bulletproof luxury. The sounds and smells of the marketplace enveloped him, vendors calling out their wares, the rich scent of cardamom and coffee, the underlying hum of commerce that had remained unchanged for centuries. He found her exactly where Tariq had described. She sat on a small folding stool beside a worn blanket spread with jewelry, delicate bracelets, intricate necklaces, earrings that caught the morning light like captured fire. Her head was tilted slightly, listening to the flow of foot traffic, her fingers working steadily on what appeared to be a new piece. Rashid stopped 20 feet away, studying her. Tariq hadn't lied about her beauty. Her skin was the color of burnished copper, her hair wrapped in a vibrant headscarf that had seen better days but still held traces of its original elegance. She wore a simple dress that had been mended in several places, and her bare feet suggested either poverty or choice. He couldn't tell which, but it was her hands that captivated him. They moved with absolute certainty, threading beads and wire with a precision that spoke of years of practice. She worked by touch alone, creating beauty she would never see. "Are you going to stand there all morning, or are you planning to buy?" "There's something?" she asked without looking up, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. Rashid started, realizing he'd been staring. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me, but you've been standing there for 5 minutes, and I can hear your expensive shoes tapping against the stone. Either you're very interested in jewelry, or you're very lost." Despite himself, Rashid smiled, a little of both, perhaps. "Well, I can help with the jewelry. You'll have to figure out the other part yourself." She held up the piece she'd been working on, a bracelet that somehow managed to look both delicate and strong. "Are you shopping for someone special?" "I'm not sure yet," Rashid replied, the words surprising him with their honesty. For the first time, she lifted her head in his direction. Her eyes were the color of dark honey, beautiful but unfocused, looking past him rather than at him. "That's an interesting answer. Most people know whether they're shopping for someone or not. Most people don't find themselves in situations they never expected." She laughed, a sound like water over stones. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? I'm Amara, by the way." "Rashid." "Well, Rashid with the expensive shoes and the uncertain shopping mission. What kind of person are you thinking about? That might help me suggest something appropriate." Rashid found himself studying her face, noting the way she tilted her head when she listened, the slight smile that suggested she found more amusement in the world than it probably deserved. "Someone strong," he said finally. "Someone who's learned to navigate the world differently than most people." "Ah." Amara's smile widened. "You're talking about someone like me." "Maybe I am." She reached for a different piece, this one a necklace with stones that seemed to shift color in the light. "This one then, tanzanite. They say it helps you see clearly, even when everything around you is confusing. Do you believe that?" "I believe that sometimes we need reminders to trust what we feel rather than what we think we should see." Rashid took the necklace, surprised by its weight and warmth. "How much?" "For you, 500 dirhams. It was far more than the piece was worth in pure monetary terms, but Rashid found himself nodding. "I'll take it." As he handed her the money, their fingers brushed, and Rashid felt something unexpected, a connection that had nothing to do with business or strategy or family expectations. For just a moment, sitting in the dust and noise of the souk, he felt more real than he had in years. "Will I see you again?" he asked, immediately regretting the thoughtless phrasing. Amara's smile turned gentle. "I'm here most days. And Rashid?" "Yes?" "Next time, don't stand so far away. I don't bite." As he walked back toward his waiting car, the necklace warm in his pocket, Rashid realized that Tariq's dare had already begun to change him. The question was no longer whether he would take the risk. It was whether he was brave enough to see where it led. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 days passed before Rashid returned to the gold souk, though not for lack of thinking about Amara. The tanzanite necklace sat on his office desk, catching the afternoon light that streamed through his 42nd floor. Windows. Every time his gaze fell on it, he heard her voice asking him to trust what he felt, rather than what he thought he should see. The irony wasn't lost on him. A blind woman teaching him about vision. His assistant, Farah, had noticed the jewelry immediately. "A gift from Miss Al-Zarani?" she'd asked with practiced discretion. "Something like that," Rashid had replied, which wasn't technically a lie but felt like one nonetheless. "Yasmin." He'd avoided her calls for 2 days, claiming urgent business in Abu Dhabi. The truth was more complicated. Every time he thought about their upcoming wedding, the elaborate ceremony, the media coverage, the merger of families, he felt a suffocating weight settle on his chest. When had his life become so predictable that his own engagement felt like a business transaction? This morning, however, there was no avoiding the inevitable. Yasmin sat across from him in his private dining room, perfectly composed in a cream-colored designer suit, her dark hair styled in a flawless chignon. She was undeniably beautiful, educated at the Sorbonne, fluent in 4 languages, and exactly what his family expected in a daughter-in-law. "You seem distracted lately," she observed, delicately cutting her fruit salad into precise pieces. "Mother says you missed the venue meeting yesterday." "I had a conference call with our Singapore partners that ran long," Rashid replied, which was partially true. He had spoken to Singapore, though the call had lasted only 20 minutes. "Rashid, we need to discuss the guest list. Father insists on inviting the Bahraini delegation, but that means we'll need to accommodate their dietary restrictions, and the caterer says—" "Yasmin." Rashid set down his coffee cup with more force than intended. "Do you ever think about what we're doing here?" She paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean? This, us, the wedding? Do you ever wonder if we're marrying for the right reasons? A flicker of something? Surprise? Concern?" Crossed her features before her composed mask slipped back into place. "We're marrying because we're compatible. Our families have known each other for generations. We share similar values, similar goals. What other reasons should there be?" "Love?" The word escaped before Rashid could stop it. Yasmin laughed, a sound like tinkling crystal. "Love is a luxury, Rashid. What we have is better: mutual respect, shared ambition, stability. Love fades, partnership endures." Her words, so practical and reasonable, struck him like ice water. Was this really what he wanted? A life built on spreadsheets and strategic advantages? "I need some air," he said, standing abruptly. "Rashid, you're being dramatic. Sit down. We have 17 more items to discuss." But he was already walking toward the door, Yasmin's voice fading behind him. As he made his way to the elevator, 20 minutes later, he found himself back at the Gold Souk, drawn by an impulse he couldn't name. Amara was in her usual spot, but today she wasn't working on jewelry. Instead, she held a worn paperback book, her fingers tracing across raised dots on the pages. Braille, of course. "What are you reading?" he asked, settling onto the stone step beside her blanket without invitation. "Expensive shoes," she said without looking up. "You're back." "You remembered my shoes. You'd be surprised what you notice when you can't see. Everyone has their own sound signature. You walk like someone who's never had to worry about where his next step will land. Is that good or bad? Depends on where you're trying to go." She closed the book, marking her place with a thin ribbon. "To answer your question, I'm reading Neruda, 20 love poems and a song of despair." "Poetry? I wouldn't have expected that. What would you have expected?" Rashid considered the question seriously. "Something practical, maybe technical manuals for jewelry making." Amara tilted her head, and he was beginning to recognize this as her thinking expression. "You know what your problem is, Rashid, with the expensive shoes? I'm sure you're going to tell me. You think in categories. Practical people read practical things. Poor people want practical things. Blind people need practical things. You can't imagine that someone might sell jewelry in a souk all day and go home to read love poetry at night." The observation hit closer to home than Rashid cared to admit. "You're right, I apologize." "Don't apologize. Just expand your thinking." She picked up a small silver ring from her display, turning it between her fingers. "This ring, for instance, you probably see it as merchandise. But I made it thinking about my grandmother's hands. She used to tell me stories about the place. She came from where silver was considered a gift from the moon goddess. When I work the metal, I can feel her fingers guiding mine. Where did you come from? Originally, I mean. Ethiopia. A small village outside Addis Ababa. My family was silversmiths for generations. Her expression grew distant. I came to Dubai 5 years ago. Different reasons, different life. Do you miss it? Home? I miss the people, but home isn't always a place you can return to. She set down the ring and faced him more directly. What about you? Are you home here? The question caught him off guard. I was born here. My family has been here for 3 generations. That's not what I asked. Rashid found himself studying. Her face, the way the afternoon light played across her features. She had high cheekbones and a strong jawline that spoke of determination. But there was something soft around her eyes that suggested she hadn't let life's hardships make her bitter. No, he said finally. I don't think I've ever felt at home anywhere. Maybe you're looking in the wrong places. Maybe I am. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching, or in Amara's case, listening to, the ebb and flow of market. Life around them. Vendors called out their prices, tourists haggled in broken Arabic, children ran between the stalls, with laughter echoing off the ancient walls. Can I ask you something? Rashid said. You've been asking me things all afternoon. This is more personal. Try me. Do you ever feel angry? About your sight, I mean. About the things you can't do, the experiences you can't have. Amara was quiet for so long that Rashid wondered if he'd overstepped. Then she spoke, her voice thoughtful. I lost my sight when I was 12. Illness. For about a year I was angry at everything. God, my parents, the universe. I felt like my life was over before it had really begun. What changed? My grandmother. She sat me down one day and told me a story about a bird who was born without wings. The bird spent its whole life watching other birds fly, feeling sorry for itself, until one day it realized it could sing more beautifully than any of them. The other birds would stop flying just to listen. So you learn to sing. I learned to create beauty in different ways. I learned that sight is only one way of experiencing the world. Sometimes I think I see things more clearly than people who have perfect vision. How so? People lie with their faces all the time, but voices tell the truth. The way someone breathes when they're nervous, the slight change in tone when they're being dishonest, the warmth that creeps in when they're genuinely interested in what you're saying. She turned toward him. You, for instance, you're troubled. About something. Your voice has been carrying weight since you sat down. Rashid felt exposed, as if she'd reached into his chest and found all his hidden doubts. I'm supposed to get married next month. Supposed to? It's been arranged. Well, not exactly arranged, but expected. She's suitable. Suitable. Amara repeated the word like it tasted bitter. That's a terrible word to use about a person you're planning to spend your life with. It's complicated, is it? Or are you making it complicated because simple would require you to admit something you don't want to face? Before Rashid could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. A crisis at one of his African offices required immediate attention. He read the text, his mind already shifting into business mode. You have to go, Amara said, reading his silence correctly. How did you... Never mind. Yes, I have to go, but Amara... Yes? Would you have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere quiet, where we can talk without... He gestured at the bustling marketplace around them. Are you asking me on a date, Rashid? The directness of the question should have flustered him. Instead, he found it refreshing. Yes, I think I am. Then yes, I think I'd like that. I'll pick you up at 7. Where? I'll meet you. Tell me where. Rashid named a small Lebanese restaurant in Jumeirah, the kind of place that valued privacy over prestige. Are you sure you don't want me to? I've been navigating this city longer than you think. I'll be fine. That evening, Rashid arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, something he never did. He'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on casual slacks and a linen shirt instead of his usual business attire. He felt nervous in a way he hadn't experienced since adolescence. Amara arrived precisely at 7, and Rashid's breath caught. She wore a simple black dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated, her hair flowing loose over her shoulders. She carried a white cane, folded and compact, and moved with confident grace toward the entrance. "You clean up well," she said as he approached to greet her. "How could you possibly know that? Better cologne, and you're standing straighter. People dress differently when they make an effort." The maitre d' led them to a corner table, and Rashid found himself seeing the familiar restaurant through new eyes. The soft lighting that usually seemed romantic now struck him as inadequate for someone who needed to hear conversations clearly. The background music that typically created ambience might interfere with Amara's ability to orient herself. "Stop overthinking," she said once they were seated. "I'm not—" "You are. I can hear it in your breathing. You're worried about whether I can handle being here, whether you need to help me read the menu, whether I'll embarrass you by asking the waiter to describe the dishes. Will you? Ask about the dishes? Probably. Embarrass you? That depends on how easily you're embarrassed." As if summoned by her words, their waiter appeared. "Good evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" "I'd like to hear about your wine selection," Amara said. "Something Lebanese, if you have it, preferably something with enough character to stand up to whatever your chef thinks he's best at tonight." The waiter, clearly delighted to discuss wine with someone who knew what she was talking about, launched into an enthusiastic description of their Lebanese vintages. Amara listened intently, asking informed questions about grape varieties and aging processes. By the time she'd made her selection, the waiter was treating her like a valued connoisseur rather than someone to be pitied. "Impressive," Rashid said once they were alone. "My father was a wine merchant before he became a silversmith. I learned to appreciate good wine before I learned to appreciate good jewelry. You're full of surprises. Everyone is if you bother to look past the surface." The evening unfolded like nothing Rashid had experienced before. Amara was funny, insightful, well-read, and utterly without pretense. She told him stories about her customers at the souk, the lonely businessman who bought a bracelet every week to send to his estranged daughter, the young woman saving for an engagement ring she planned to buy herself, the elderly man who came just to sit and listen to her work. "You see people," Rashid observed. "I pay attention. There's a difference. Most people are so busy looking at what they expect to see that they miss what's actually there. What do you see when you pay attention to me?" Amara considered the question, while their main course arrived. "I see someone who's forgotten how to want things for himself. Someone who's spent so long being what other people need him to be that he's lost track of who he actually is." "That's fairly accurate. I also see someone who's kinder than he gives himself credit for, and someone who's lonelier than he wants to admit." "What makes you think I'm lonely?" "The way you listen. Lonely people are the best listeners because they're hungry for real connection. They pay attention to everything because they never know when they might find something genuine." Rashid felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of defenses he'd maintained for so long he'd forgotten they were there. "What about you? What should I see when I pay attention to you?" "Someone who's learned that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward, despite it. Someone who's discovered that losing one thing often teaches you to appreciate everything else more deeply." She paused, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "And someone who's tired of being seen as brave, when all she really wants is to be seen as whole." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that made Rashid's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. When had anyone spoken to him with such unguarded truth? "Amara," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Yes, I think I'm going to do something completely insane. Oh, should I be worried? I think I'm going to ask you to marry me. The statement surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Amara set down her wineglass carefully, her expression unreadable. Is this part of your crisis with the suitable woman? She asked finally. Maybe, or maybe it's the first honest thing I've felt in years. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, they're not. Rashid leaned forward. I know how this sounds. I know we've known each other for less than a week. I know this is crazy. It is crazy, but I also know that I've spent the last 5 years building an empire and forgetting to build a life. And sitting here with you, I feel more alive than I have in longer than I can remember. Amara was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her wineglass. What about your family, your suitable fiancé, your perfectly ordered world? Maybe it's time to disorder it a little. Marriage isn't a rebellion, Rashid. It's not something you do to prove a point or win a dare. The fact that she seemed to see right through to the heart of his motivations should have alarmed him. Instead, it made him want her more. You're right, but what if it started as those things and became something else? What if taking a crazy risk led to something real? What are you really asking me? Rashid reached across the table, covering her hand with his. I'm asking if you believe in the possibility that two people can recognize something in each other, even when they've just met. I'm asking if you think it's worth finding out what happens when someone finally sees you as whole instead of broken. And if I say yes, if I agree to this insanity, what happens when the novelty wears off and you remember all the reasons why this is impossible? Then I'll spend every day proving to you that those reasons don't matter. Amara turned her hand, palm up, intertwining their fingers. Her skin was warm and calloused from her work, real in a way that everything else in his life felt manufactured. Ask me again, she said softly. What? If you're serious, ask me properly. Rashid felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he stood, pulling her up with him. Right there in the restaurant, surrounded by other diners and curious waitstaff, he dropped to one knee. Amara, I know this is crazy. I know we barely know each other, but I also know that you make me want to be the man I forgot I could be. Will you marry me? For a moment that felt like eternity. She didn't respond. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, yes. The restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause from nearby tables, but Rashid barely heard it. He was too busy trying to memorize the feel of Amara's hand in his, the smile that transformed her entire face, the moment when his perfectly controlled. Life took its first real leap into the unknown. The news hit the Al-Mansouri family compound like a Category 5 hurricane at precisely 9:47 a.m. the following morning. Rashid had barely finished his first cup of coffee when his phone began exploding, with calls. His mother, his father, his uncle, 3 cousins, and finally, inevitably, Yasmin herself. He let them all go to voicemail. He'd known this moment would come the instant he'd proposed to Amara the night before. Word traveled fast in Dubai's elite circles, and a public proposal in a restaurant, even a discreet one, had witnesses. By morning, the gossip network that connected every wealthy family in the Emirates would be buzzing with the scandalous news. The heir to Mansouri Global had proposed to a blind street vendor. His assistant, Farah, appeared in his office doorway, her hugely composed expression strained. Sir, your mother is on line 1. She's called 6 times. Your father is on line 2. And Miss Al-Zarani is in the lobby demanding to see you. Security doesn't know whether to let her up or call the police. Send Yasmin up, Rashid said, closing his laptop with deliberate calm. And hold all other calls. All of them, even your parents, especially my parents. 5 minutes later, Yasmin swept into his office like an elegant tornado. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor with military precision, and her usual perfect composure had developed hairline cracks around the edges. She was still beautiful, still impeccably dressed, but there was something wild in her eyes that Rashid had never seen before. "Have you lost your mind?" she asked without preamble. "Good morning to you too, Yasmin." "Don't." She held up a manicured hand. "Do not play games with me right now. I just spent the most humiliating hour of my life explaining to my father why the Emirates Today gossip columnist called asking for my comment on my fiancé's engagement to another woman." Rashid stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, Amara was probably setting up her jewelry display at the souk, unaware that her quiet life was about to be turned upside down. "I'm sorry you found out that way. I should have called you first. Called me first?" Yasmin's voice climbed an octave. "You should have called me instead, as in, instead of proposing to some random woman you met selling trinkets in the street." "She's not random, and they're not trinkets." "Oh my God." Yasmin sank into the chair across from his desk. "This is really happening. You've actually done this." "Yes." "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Is it something I did? Something I didn't do?" "We could have had everything, Rashid. Power, influence, security. Our children would have been safe," Rashid finished. "Comfortable, predictable, living the exact same life we're living, making the exact same choices we made." "What's wrong with that?" "Nothing. For some people." He turned back to face her. "But I realized I don't want safe anymore. I want real." Yasmin's laugh was bitter. "Real? You think what you have with this woman is real? You've known her for a week. She's blind, Rashid. She sells jewelry in the street. What could you possibly have in common with someone like that?" "More than I ever had with you." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, and he watched them hit Yasmin like a physical blow. For a moment, her mask slipped completely, and he saw something he'd never noticed before: genuine hurt. "I see," she said quietly. "Well, I hope she's worth destroying both our families' reputations. I hope she's worth losing half your board of directors when they realize you've married so far beneath your station that you'll be a laughingstock in every business circle from here to London." "She is." Yasmin stood, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. "You know what the worst part is? I actually thought we had something. Maybe not passion, maybe not the kind of love they write poetry about, but respect, partnership. I thought that mattered to you." "It did. It does. But respect isn't enough anymore. I hope you remember that when your little fairy tale collapses." She walked to the door, then paused without turning around. "And Rashid, when it does collapse, don't come looking for me to pick up the pieces." The silence after she left felt heavy and final. Rashid had expected anger, even expected tears. What he hadn't expected was the hollow feeling in his chest, as he realized he was burning bridges he'd never be able to rebuild. His phone rang. His father's private line. "Abdullah Al-Mansouri requests your immediate presence at the family residence," his father's assistant said in formal Arabic. The use of his father's full name and the formal language meant this wasn't a request, it was a summons. An hour later, Rashid stood in his father's study, a room that had intimidated him as a child and still carried the weight of 3 generations of Al-Mansouri power. His father, Hassan, sat behind the massive wooden desk that had belonged to Rashid's grandfather, his expression carved from stone. His mother, Zahra, occupied the chair beside the desk, her elegant fingers twisted in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed. "Sit," Hassan commanded. Rashid remained standing. "I know why I'm here." "Do you? Do you understand that in the span of 12 hours you've managed to humiliate this family in ways I didn't think were possible?" Hassan's voice was deadly quiet. "Do you comprehend that your mother has fielded 17 phone calls this morning from friends and relatives asking if the rumors are true?" "The rumors are true." Zahra made a sound like a wounded animal. "Rashid, Habibi, what have you done?" The Zahrani family is threatening to withdraw from the telecommunications partnership. Your uncle says the board is calling for an emergency meeting. Everyone is saying, I don't care what everyone is saying. Hassan stood, his hands flat on the desk. You don't care? This business, this legacy, everything your grandfather and I built, you don't care? I care about the business. I care about our family's reputation, but I won't sacrifice my life to preserve it. Your life? Hassan's laugh was devoid of humor. Boy, you have no idea what life is. You've been handed everything on a silver platter. You've never wanted for anything, never struggled for anything. And now you want to throw it all away for some beggar woman who can't even see. Don't. Rashid's voice dropped to a dangerous level. Don't talk about her that way. I'll talk about her however I please. She's a nobody, a charity case. What is she? Ethiopian? Kenyan? Some refugee who's managed to seduce my son with sob, stories and enough. Rashid stepped closer to the desk. Her name is Amara. She's an artist, a businesswoman, and more intelligent than half the people who will come to your parties. And she's going to be my wife. Zara stood, tears streaming down her face. Rashid, please, think about what you're saying. Marriage isn't just about feelings. It's about family, about legacy, about building something that lasts. This woman, she can't give you the kind of life you deserve. What if I don't want the life I deserve? What if I want the life I choose? Hassan came around the desk, his face flushed with anger. Choose? You think this is about choice? You have responsibilities. To this family, to this business, to the hundreds of people who depend on us for their livelihoods. You can't just abandon all of that because you've developed some romantic fantasy about a street vendor. I'm not abandoning anything. I'm changing it by marrying someone who will be seen as a joke by every person who matters in our world. Maybe it's time we started caring about different people. The slap came without warning, Hassan's palm connecting with Rashid's cheek with enough force to snap his head to the side. In 34 years, his father had never raised a hand to him. You ungrateful child, Hassan breathed. You have no idea what you're destroying. Rashid touched his cheek, tasting blood where his teeth had cut his lip. When he looked back at his father, his voice was steady. I know exactly what I'm destroying. The question is whether it was worth preserving in the first place. Get out, Hassan said. Get out of my house, and don't come back until you're ready to behave like the man I raised you to be. What if this is who you raised me to be? Rashid asked. What if you taught me to fight for what I believe in, to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, to value integrity over convenience? What if everything you're angry about is actually everything you taught me? Hassan turned away, his shoulders rigid. You have 48 hours to end this nonsense and return to your senses. After that, the board will vote on your position as CEO. I won't be able to protect you. I'm not asking you to. Rashid left the family compound for what he suspected might be the last time. His phone had collected 37 missed calls and dozens of text messages, ranging from curious to concerned to hostile. News of his proposal had already made it to the business pages of 3 local newspapers and 2 international trade publications. Mansouri heirs, shocking engagement rocks Dubai elite, read one headline. From boardroom to souk, a love story or corporate suicide? Asked another. He drove directly to the gold souk, needing to see Amara to make sure she was all right, to prepare her for the storm that was about to descend on both of them. But when he reached her usual spot, she wasn't there. Her blanket, her jewelry, her folding stool, everything was gone. Excuse me, he called to the spice vendor in the neighboring stall. The woman who sells jewelry here. Have you seen her today? The man looked at him suspiciously. You're the one from the newspapers, aren't you? The rich man who proposed to the blind girl. Where is she? Gone. Left early this morning with everything packed up. Said she might not be back for a while. The vendor studied Rashid's face. You bring trouble to her, yes? Rich man trouble, always bad trouble. Panic clawed at Rashid's chest. Did she say where she was going? She not tell me. But she's scared. I know scared when I see it. Rashid spent the next 4 hours driving through Dubai, checking every hotel, every shelter, every place he could think of where Amara might have gone. Finally, as the sun was setting, he found her. She was sitting on a bench in Zabil Park, her small suitcase beside her, her white cane folded in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than he'd ever seen her. "I've been looking everywhere for you," he said, sitting beside her without invitation. "I know. I've been waiting for you to find me." "Why did you leave the souk?" Amara sighed, her fingers worrying the handle of her cane. "A reporter came by around 11 this morning, started asking questions about us, about my background, about whether I was pregnant or if there was some other scandal that would explain why Dubai's most eligible bachelor would propose to a blind immigrant. What did you tell them?" "Nothing, but they took pictures anyway, of my jewelry, my setup, me. They made it sound like I was some kind of gold digger who'd seduced you for your money." Her voice was steady, but Rashid could hear the hurt underneath. "Is that what people think? I don't care what people think. You should. Because I'm starting to realize that this isn't just about us anymore. Your family, your business, your reputation. I'm going to destroy all of it, aren't I?" Rashid reached for her hand. "You're not destroying anything. If anything gets destroyed, it's because it was already broken. Your father called me." The words hit Rashid like ice water. "What?" "This afternoon. Someone gave him my number. He was polite, but he made it very clear that marrying you would be the worst thing I could do to you. That I'd be dragging you down to my level instead of lifting myself up to yours. He had no right. He offered me money, Rashid. 2 million dirhams to disappear, to leave Dubai and never contact you again." Rashid felt fury building in his chest like a physical pressure. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that if he thought his son's love could be bought and sold, then he didn't know his son at all." Amara turned toward him, her unseeing eyes finding his face with uncanny accuracy. "But Rashid, maybe he's right about one thing. Maybe I will drag you down. Look at me," he said, then caught himself. "I mean, I know what you mean." She smiled sadly. "And I am looking at you in all the ways that matter. Then you know that none of this changes how I feel. If anything, seeing how they're treating you makes me more certain that I'm making the right choice. Even if it costs you everything." "It won't cost me everything. It'll cost me the things that were never really mine to begin with." Amara was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the park around them. Children playing, families having evening picnics, the normal rhythms of life continuing despite the chaos in their own world. "And there's something I need to tell you," she said finally. "Something I should have told you before you proposed." "What is it?" "I'm not just Ethiopian, Rashid. My family, we left the country when I was young because of political troubles. My father had been involved with opposition groups, and when the government started cracking down, we had to flee. We lived in refugee camps for 3 years before we could get proper documentation." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because when those reporters start digging into my background, they're going to find out. And when they do, it's going to be another scandal for you to weather. The heir to Mansouri Global married to a political refugee. It'll never end." Rashid stood, pulling her up with him. "Amara, listen to me very carefully. I don't care if you're a political refugee. I don't care if your family had to flee their country. I don't care if you lived in camps or shelters or palaces. The only thing I care about is that you're brave, enough to start a new life with me. Are you sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. Your family will disown you. Your business partners will question your judgment. Society will treat you like you've lost your mind. Then we'll build a new family. We'll find new partners. We'll create our own society. Amara's smile was radiant and heartbreaking at the same time. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both. When do you want to do this? The wedding, I mean. Tomorrow, Rashid said without hesitation. I don't want to give anyone else time to interfere. I don't want to give doubt time to grow. I want to marry you tomorrow. That's impossible. Even in Dubai, there are procedures, paperwork. I have connections. Money opens doors that are usually closed. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to make some calls. By tomorrow evening, you'll be Mrs. Al-Mansouri, and the whole world can deal with it. As he dialed the first number, Amara caught his arm. Rashid. Yes. Thank you. For what? For seeing me as worth fighting for. He kissed her then, right there in the park as the sun set over Dubai, not caring who might be watching or what pictures might end up in tomorrow's newspapers. For the first time in his life, he was exactly where he wanted to be, doing exactly what he wanted to do with exactly the person he wanted to do it with. Tomorrow, he would marry the woman who had taught him to see clearly. Tonight, he would finish burning down the life that had never really fit him anyway. The real adventure was about to begin. The wedding took place at sunset in the gardens of the Atlantis resort, not in the grand ballroom Rashid had originally reserved for his marriage to Yasmin, but in an intimate gazebo overlooking the Persian Gulf. 24 hours had been enough time to secure a marriage license, arrange for an imam, and transform a corner of paradise into something worthy of the occasion. It had not been enough time for Rashid's family to organize their opposition or for the media to fully mobilize their coverage. Only 12 people attended the ceremony. Amara's friend Khadija, a fellow vendor from the souk who served as her witness. Rashid's driver Ahmad, who had become more family than employee over the years. The imam, a gentleman named Sheikh Abdullah, who had agreed to perform the ceremony on short notice. A handful of hotel staff who had insisted on staying to witness what one of them called the most romantic thing they'd ever seen. And surprisingly, Tariq Rashid's cousin had appeared an hour before the ceremony, impeccably dressed and carrying a small, wrapped gift. Couldn't miss the wedding I inspired, he said with his characteristic smirk, though there was something softer in his eyes than Rashid had ever seen before. Besides, someone from the family should be here, even if it's just the black sheep. Father will never forgive you for coming. Father will never forgive either of us for a lot of things. Might as well make it count. Amara wore a dress that Khadija had helped her choose. Simple ivory silk that moved like water when she walked, with intricate beadwork around the neckline that caught the fading sunlight. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she carried a small bouquet of jasmine and orange blossoms that filled the air with their perfume. She had never looked more beautiful, and the fact that she couldn't see the way every person present watched her with something approaching awe made her even more radiant. Rashid wore a traditional white thobe instead of a Western suit, a choice that felt more honest somehow. As Amara approached on Khadija's arm, he felt his breath catch. This was really happening. In a few minutes, she would be his wife, and his old life would be officially, irrevocably over. The ceremony itself was brief but profound. Sheikh Abdullah spoke about the courage required to choose love over convention, about the way two people could become stronger together than they ever were apart. When it came time for the vows, Amara and Rashid had chosen to write their own. Rashid began, his voice stronger than he'd expected. 3 days ago, I thought I knew what my life would look like. I thought I had everything planned, everything controlled. You showed me that the most important things in life can't be planned or controlled. They can only be felt and chosen and fought for. I promise to choose you every day, to fight for us every day, and to never stop being grateful that you taught me how to see. Amara's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. Rashid, you saw me when the world wanted to look away. You heard me when others only heard what they expected. You believed I was worthy of love when I had almost stopped believing it myself. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to remind you every day that the bravest thing anyone can do is love without reservation. When Sheikh Abdullah pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in applause and traditional ululations from the female hotel staff. Rashid lifted Amara's veil and kissed her as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that seemed to bless their union. "How do you feel, Mrs. Al-Mansouri?" he whispered against her lips. "Terrified and exhilarated and complete," she whispered back. "How do you feel, husband? Like I can finally breathe." The reception was equally intimate. Dinner served on the resort's private beach, with lanterns strung between palm trees and the sound of waves providing nature's own symphony. The food was Lebanese, Ethiopian, and Emirati, a fusion that represented their merged cultures. Amara had insisted on helping plan the menu, working with the chef to create dishes that would honor both their heritages. As the evening progressed, Rashid found himself studying his new wife in the lantern light. She moved through the small party with grace, charming every person present with her warmth and intelligence. She told stories that made people laugh, asked questions that made them think, and somehow managed to make everyone feel like they were part of something special. "She's remarkable," Tariq said, appearing at Rashid's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "I have to admit, I didn't expect this when I made that dare." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I thought you'd chicken out. Or if you didn't, I thought it would be some kind of elaborate practical joke that you'd end after proving your point." Tariq watched Amara, helping Khadija navigate the sandy beach in her heels. "I didn't expect you to find someone who would actually make you happy. She does make me happy, more than I thought was possible." "Good, because Father's planning to make your life hell. The board meeting is scheduled for Monday morning. He's going to try to have you removed as CEO. I know. You don't sound worried." Rashid sipped his champagne, tasting the bubbles burst on his tongue. "I built that company into what it is today. If the board wants to remove me because I'm married for love instead of strategy, then maybe it's not the kind of company I want to run anymore. And if they do remove you, what then? Then Amara and I will build something new, something that belongs to us instead of to 3 generations of family expectations." Tariq stared at him for a long moment. "You've really changed, haven't you? This isn't just rebellion or midlife crisis or whatever Father thinks it is." "No, it's not. I'm proud of you, cousin, and I'm sorry it took a dare to get you here." As the evening wound down, Rashid and Amara said goodbye to their few guests. Khadija hugged Amara fiercely, whispering something in Amharic that made both women tear up. Ahmad shook Rashid's hand with the solemnity of a man who had watched him grow up and was proud of the man he'd become. Sheikh Abdullah offered a blessing for their marriage and their future together. Tariq was the last to leave. He embraced Rashid, then turned to Amara. "Sister," he said formally, "welcome to the family, such as it is." "Thank you for being here," she replied. "It meant everything to Rashid, which means everything to me." "Take care of him. He's more fragile than he likes to admit, and he's stronger than he knows," Amara replied. "We'll take care of each other." Alone at last, Rashid and Amara walked hand in hand along the beach toward the presidential suite that would be their home for the next 3 days. They had planned a proper honeymoon later, perhaps to Morocco or the Maldives, but for now, this was perfect, just the two of them, and the sound of waves washing against the shore. "No regrets?" Rashid asked as they reached the suite's private terrace. "About marrying you?" "Never." Amara turned in his arms, her hands finding his face in the darkness. "About the way we did it? About the speed, the circumstances, the fact that we barely know each other? Maybe I should have regrets about those things, but I don't. We know each other in the ways that matter. Do we? I know you're kind and brave and willing to risk everything for what you believe in. I know you make me laugh, and you make me feel safe, and you see me as whole instead of broken. But Rashid, there are things about me you don't know, things I haven't told you. There are things you don't know about me either. We have a lifetime to learn each other's secrets. What if some secrets are too big? What if learning them changes everything?" Rashid studied her face in the moonlight, noting the tension around her eyes, the way she worried her lower lip between her teeth. "What are you trying to tell me, Amara?" "Nothing. Tonight. I don't want anything to spoil tonight." She smiled, but he could see the effort it cost her. "Tomorrow, if you want, we can talk about the things we haven't said yet. But tonight, I just want to be your wife." He kissed her then, tasting salt air and champagne and something indefinably sweet that was purely her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he scooped her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold of their suite. The room had been prepared by the hotel staff, with rose petals scattered across the bed, candles flickering on every surface, and champagne chilling in a silver bucket. It was romantic and beautiful, and everything a wedding night should be. But Rashid found himself more interested in the woman in his arms than in any of the elaborate decorations. "I love you," he said, setting her down gently beside the bed. "I know it's too soon to say that. I know we're moving too fast, but I need you to know." "I love you too," she whispered back. "And you're right. It is too soon, and we are moving too fast, and none of it matters, because some things don't follow reasonable timelines." They made love that night with a tenderness that surprised them both. Despite the whirlwind courtship, despite the pressure and chaos of the past few days, when they came together, it felt natural and right and inevitable. Amara traced the planes of Rashid's face with her fingertips, memorizing him through touch. Rashid whispered endearments in Arabic and English and a few words of Amharic that Amara had taught him. They learned each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's hearts, with patience and wonder and a growing certainty that they were meant to be exactly where they were. Afterward, they lay tangled in silk sheets, listening to the sound of the ocean beyond their windows. Amara's head rested on Rashid's chest, her fingers drawing lazy patterns across his skin. He played with her hair, marveling at how soft it was, how perfectly she fit against him. "Rashid," she said quietly, tomorrow, when I tell you what. I haven't told you yet. Promise me you'll remember tonight. Promise me you'll remember how this feels right now." "Amara, you're scaring me. What is it you think you need to tell me?" "Not now, please. Let me have tonight to just be happy." There was something in her voice, a note of desperation or fear, that made Rashid's chest tighten with unease. But she was right about one thing. Tonight was their wedding night, and whatever tomorrow brought, they deserved these few hours of pure happiness. "I promise," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'll remember." But as Amara fell, asleep in his arms, Rashid found himself staring at the ceiling, wondering what secret could be so devastating that she was afraid it might change everything between them. What could this remarkable woman have done or experienced that she thought might make him love her less? He held her closer, breathing in the scent of jasmine in her hair, and made a silent vow that whatever she told him tomorrow, he would find a way to make it okay. They had already weathered family opposition, social scandal, and professional consequences. How much worse could one more secret be? As it turned out, he was about to find out exactly how much worse things could get. The morning sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their suite, found them still entwined. But something had changed in the night. Amara lay awake beside him, her body tense despite the warmth of his embrace. She'd been rehearsing the words in her mind for hours, trying to find a way to say what needed to be said without destroying everything they had built together. When Rashid finally stirred, pressing a sleepy kiss to her shoulder, she felt her heart break a little bit, because she knew that in a few minutes everything would be different. The secret she had been carrying, the truth she had hidden even from herself most days, was about to surface. And once it did, there would be no going back. "Good morning, wife," he murmured against her skin. "Good morning, husband," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Are you ready for that conversation now?" Rashid pulled back to look at her face, and something in her expression made him fully alert. "Amara, whatever it is, we'll handle it together." "I hope so," she whispered. "I really hope so." And with those words, their perfect wedding night officially came to an end, and the real test of their marriage was about to begin. The morning light filtering through the sheer curtains painted everything in soft gold, but Amara couldn't appreciate its beauty. She sat on the edge of the bed, her back to Rashid, listening to him order room service, with the casual authority of someone who had never doubted that the world would bend to accommodate his wishes. In a few minutes, he would hang up the phone and ask her what she needed to tell him, and then everything would change. "Ethiopian coffee and fresh fruit for my wife," he was saying into the phone, "and whatever pastries you recommend, we're celebrating." The warmth in his voice when he said, "my wife," made Amara's chest ache with what felt like impending loss. When he finally ended the call and turned his attention to her, she could feel the shift in the room's energy. The playful morning after atmosphere evaporated, replaced by something heavier and more dangerous. "Amara," he said gently, sitting beside her on the bed, "whatever it is, just tell me. The waiting is worse than knowing could ever be." She turned to face him, her hands trembling slightly as they found his. "Before I say anything, I need you to understand something. Everything I've told you about myself, everything you know about who I am, it's all true. I haven't lied to you, Rashid, but I haven't told you everything either, okay? When I was 17, back in Ethiopia, before my family had to flee," she stopped, took a breath, started again. "There was a man in our village, older, powerful, connected to the government officials my father was opposing. His name was Dawit Alemayehu." Rashid nodded, waiting for her to continue, but something in her tone was already making him uneasy. "Dawit had been watching me for months, following me to the market, showing up at places where I worked, making comments about how I would make a good wife for an important man like himself. My parents tried to keep me away from him, but in a small village, there's only so much you can do." "Amara, let me finish, please. If I stop now, I might not be able to start again." She was gripping his hands so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "One night, when my father was away meeting with other opposition members, Dawit, who came to our house, he had soldiers with him. He told my mother that he was taking me as payment for my father's crimes against the state." Rashid felt ice forming in his stomach. "Taking you how?" "As his wife. Forced marriage is still common there, especially when politics are involved. The soldiers held my mother back while Dawit dragged me away. I was 17 years old, Rashid. I didn't even know what marriage really meant." "Jesus Christ, Amara. The ceremony, if you can call it that, took place the next morning. Just Dawit, a corrupt imam he had paid, and 2 witnesses who were afraid to refuse him. I wore my everyday clothes because no one cared what I wanted or how I felt. Afterward, he took me to his compound outside the village." Rashid was very still now, his hands steady in hers, despite the storm building behind his eyes. "How long?" 6 months. 6 months of being his prisoner, his property. He wasn't physically cruel, not in the way you might think, but he owned me completely. I couldn't leave the compound, couldn't see my family, couldn't even speak to another person without his permission. He would bring me books sometimes, jewelry, little gifts, as if kindness could make up for stealing my entire life. How did you get away? The political situation got worse. My father's opposition group gained more support, and Dawit's government connections became liabilities instead of assets. One night, there was fighting in the village. In the chaos, some of Dawit's guards fled, and I managed to escape. I made it back to my family, just as they were preparing to flee the country. Amara released his hands and stood, walking to the window where she could feel the warmth of the sun on her face. We spent 3 years in refugee camps in Kenya before we could get proper documentation to come to Dubai. During that time, I never told anyone about the 6 months with Dawit, not my parents, not the aid workers, not anyone. I was too ashamed. Ashamed. Of what? You were kidnapped and forced into marriage. You were a victim, not a participant. I know that in my head. But Rashid, in the eyes of many people, especially in traditional communities, I'm not a virgin bride. I'm not pure. I'm not suitable for a man like you. Rashid turned to stare at her profile against the window. Is that what you think? That I would care about something that was done to you against your will? I don't know what you think. That's what terrifies me. She turned back to him, her unseeing eyes bright with unshed tears. Last night was beautiful, Rashid. It was everything. I never thought I would have. But I went into our marriage carrying this secret, and that's not fair to you. Amara, look at me. I am looking at you. No, you're not. You're looking at some imaginary version of me who would blame you for surviving something terrible. The real me, the man who married you yesterday, doesn't give a damn about your past, except to wish I could have protected you from it. You say that now. I say that because it's true. Rashid stood and crossed to her, taking her face in his hands. Do you know what I'm thinking right now? I'm thinking about how strong you had to be to survive that experience. I'm thinking about how brave you had to be to trust me enough to tell me about it. And I'm thinking about how much I want to find this Dawit bastard and make him pay for every day he stole from you. Rashid, I'm not finished. I'm also thinking about how glad I am that you told me, because now I understand why you were so afraid yesterday. Why you kept asking if I was sure. Why you seemed terrified that I might change my mind. But Amara, nothing you've told me changes how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me love you more. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. How can you say that? Because loving someone means accepting all of them, their past, their pain, their secrets, their strength. I don't love you despite what happened to you. I love you for who you became because of it. You could have let that experience make you bitter or afraid or closed off. Instead, you learned to create beauty with your hands, to find joy in small things, to trust people enough to fall in love. That's not damage, Amara. That's resilience. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing with a relief so profound it was almost painful. Rashid held her, one hand stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort in Arabic and English, while she cried out years of shame and fear and self-doubt. There's more, she said, when she could finally speak again. Rashid's hand stilled on her. Here. More? About my blindness, about how I lost my sight. Amara, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because this part affects you too. She pulled back to face him, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. I didn't lose my sight to illness when I was 12, like I told you. I lost it during my escape from Dawit's compound. What happened? There was an explosion during the fighting that night. I was running through the village when a building caught fire and part of it collapsed. I was caught in the debris. When I woke up 3 days later, the world was dark and it never came back. My God! The thing is, Rashid, I've never seen a doctor about it, not a real one. In the refugee camps, there were medics who looked at my eyes and said the damage was permanent, but they didn't have the equipment for proper testing. When we came to Dubai, we couldn't afford specialists. I've been assuming for 15 years that my blindness is irreversible. But you don't know for certain. No, I don't know for certain. She took a shaky breath. Yesterday, when you said you wanted to marry me, when you looked at me like I was whole and perfect exactly as I am, I realized I was afraid to find out. Because what if my sight could be restored? What if the only reason you think you love me is because you see me as this brave, inspiring blind woman? What if you got tired of me once I became ordinary? Rashid stared at her, trying to process everything she'd just told him. Amara, do you hear yourself? You think I fell in love with your blindness? I think you fell in love with the story of overcoming adversity. I think you fell in love with rescuing someone who seemed to need rescuing. And I think if I suddenly became a sighted woman with a traumatic past and no inspiring narrative about triumph over disability, you might realize you made a mistake. That's the most ridiculous thing you've ever said. Is it? Can you honestly tell me that my blindness wasn't part of what attracted you to me? The drama of it, the uniqueness, the way it made you feel noble and protective. The question hit too, close to home for Rashid's comfort. Had her blindness been part of what drew him to her initially? Had he been attracted to the idea of being her protector, her guide, her link to a sighted world? Maybe, he admitted quietly. At first. Maybe. It was part of what made me notice you, but Amara, that's not what made me fall in love with you. What did? Your laugh, the way you listen when people talk to you like every word matters, the way you hold your head when you're thinking, the way you create beauty with your hands, the way you've never once asked me for anything or made me feel like you need me to complete you. You're complete all on your own, but what if no? Rashid took her hands again, his voice firm. No more what-ifs. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to call the best ophthalmologist in Dubai. We're going to get your eyes examined properly, and if there's even a chance that some of your sight can be restored, we're going to explore that option. And if it can be, if I can see again, then I'll be the luckiest man alive, because I'll get to watch you see the world for the first time. In 15 years, I'll get to see your face when you look at a sunset or a flower or your own reflection, and if it can't be, then nothing changes between us except that we'll stop wondering. You're not afraid it will change things between us. I'm terrified it will change things between us, Rashid said honestly. But I'm more afraid of building our marriage on assumptions and secrets. We've already taken the biggest risk possible by falling in love and getting married. What's one more risk compared to that? A knock at the door interrupted them. Room service with their breakfast, arriving at the most emotionally charged moment possible. Rashid wanted to ignore it, but Amara was already moving toward the bathroom. I need a few minutes, she said, to wash my face and process all of this. Can you handle the breakfast delivery? Of course. And Rashid, thank you for not running away when I told you about Dawit, for not making me feel broken or damaged, for not making me regret trusting you with the truth. Thank you for trusting me with it. After she disappeared into the bathroom, Rashid opened the door to receive their breakfast tray, his mind racing. The waiter set up their meal on the private terrace, chattering cheerfully about the beautiful morning and the romantic atmosphere, but Rashid barely heard him. His thoughts were consumed with everything Amara had just revealed. She had been kidnapped, forced into marriage, had escaped during a civil conflict and lost her sight in the process, had been carrying shame and fear about all of it for 15 years. And now she was terrified that learning the truth about her vision would somehow change what they had together. He thought about the woman he'd met at the souk, the woman he'd fallen in love with and married. Strong, independent, creative, intelligent, funny, kind. None of those qualities had anything to do with her blindness. If anything, her ability to navigate the world without sight was just one more example of her remarkable character. But he couldn't deny that part of him had been attracted to the drama of it all. The story of the wealthy man and the blind woman. The narrative of rescue and transformation, the way it made him feel noble and necessary. The question was, what happened to those feelings when the story became more complicated? When the woman wasn't just bravely overcoming a disability, but was also carrying trauma from sexual violence and political persecution. When the rescue narrative became a story about two people healing each other instead of one person saving the other. Rashid poured coffee and waited for his wife to emerge from the bathroom, knowing that whatever happened next would determine not just the future of her sight, but the future of their marriage. Because the truth was, he had no idea who either of them would be once all the secrets were finally on the table. The only thing he knew for certain was that he was about to find out. Dr. Sarah Chen had been Dubai's most sought-after ophthalmologist for over a decade, but she had never conducted an examination quite like this one. The patient sitting in her chair was the new wife of Rashid Al-Mansouri, whose shocking marriage had dominated the local news for 3 days straight. More intriguingly, the woman had been blind for 15 years and had never received a comprehensive eye examination during that entire time. "Mrs. Al-Mansouri," Dr. Chen said gently, adjusting the specialized equipment that surrounded Amara's chair, "I want you to understand that we're essentially starting from scratch here. The medical reports from the refugee camps were basic at best, and 15 years is a long time. Whatever we discover today, try not to get your hopes up too high." "I understand," Amara replied, though her voice was tight with nerves. "My husband is more optimistic than I am about all this." Rashid sat in the corner of the examination room, his usual commanding presence subdued by the clinical environment. He'd spent the morning making calls to ensure they saw the best possible specialist, but now that they were here, he felt helpless. This was beyond his ability to control or influence through wealth or connections. "Let's start with some basic tests," Dr. Chen continued. "I'm going to shine lights of different intensities into your eyes. Tell me if you perceive anything at all, changes in darkness, shadows, any sensation whatsoever." For the next 30 minutes, Amara submitted to a battery of tests unlike anything she'd experienced. Lights flashed in her eyes, instruments measured the pressure and shape of her eyeballs, and scanners created detailed images of her retinas and optic nerves. Through it all, she remained perfectly still, answering Dr. Chen's questions with clinical precision, while Rashid watched every movement, every expression. "Interesting," Dr. Chen murmured, studying the computer screen that displayed cross-sections of Amara's eyes. "Very interesting indeed." "What is it?" Rashid asked, unable to keep quiet any longer. "The damage isn't what I expected to see." "Mrs. Al-Mansouri, you said you lost your sight in an explosion when you were 17. "Yes, a building collapsed during fighting in my village. I was caught in the debris." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "That would typically cause what we call traumatic optic neuropathy, damage to the optic nerves themselves. But that's not what I'm seeing here." Amara's hands clenched in her lap. "What are you seeing?" "Dense cataracts in both eyes, along with some scarring on the corneas. But Mrs. Al-Mansouri, your optic nerves appear to be completely intact. Your retinas show no signs of damage. The basic structures necessary for vision are all present and functional." The room fell silent, except for the hum of medical equipment. Rashid felt his heart stop, then restart with a thunderous rhythm. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means Dr. Chen said carefully that Mrs. Al-Mansouri's blindness is entirely caused by physical obstructions that can potentially be surgically corrected. Amara made a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. Are you saying I could see again? I'm saying it's possible. The cataracts alone would have been enough to cause complete blindness, especially if they developed rapidly after trauma. The corneal scarring complicates things, but with modern surgical techniques. Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. I would estimate a 70 to 80% chance of restoring significant vision, possibly even normal or near normal sight. The words hit the room like a physical force. Rashid stood abruptly, pacing to the window, his mind reeling. Amara sat frozen in the examination chair, her face a mask of shock and something that looked almost like fear. How is that possible? She whispered. 15 years. Everyone told me it was permanent. 15 years ago, the technology didn't exist to make these repairs safely. Even 5 years ago, the success rates would have been much lower. But corneal transplants and cataract surgery have advanced dramatically. What seemed impossible then is routine now. And the risks? Every surgery carries risks, but these are generally considered low-risk procedures. The bigger question is whether you want to proceed. This is entirely your choice, Mrs. Al-Mansouri. Amara turned her head toward where Rashid stood by the window, though she couldn't see him. I need to think about this. I need to talk to my husband. How long do I have to decide? Take all the time you need. But I wouldn't wait too long. The longer the damage remains, the more difficult repair becomes. 20 minutes later, they sat in Rashid's car in the hospital parking garage, the engine running, but neither of them speaking. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Say something, Amara finally whispered. I don't know what to say. This changes everything. Does it? Does it really? Her voice was sharp with anxiety. Or does it change nothing? Rashid turned off the engine and shifted to face her. Amara, you could see again. You could see my face, see the world, see colors, and sunsets, and all the things you've been missing for 15 years. How does that not change everything? Because I don't know if I want to. The admission hung between them like a confession. Rashid stared at her profile, trying to understand what she was feeling. You don't want to see again? I don't know. For 15 years, I've built a life around being blind. I've developed skills, instincts, ways of navigating the world that work for me. I've made peace with who I am. What if getting my sight back means losing all of that? What if I become a different person? Would that be so terrible? What if you don't like the person I become? There it was. The fear she'd been carrying since yesterday. Rashid reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Amara, listen to me. I fell in love with your mind, your heart, your soul. Those things don't change based on whether you can see or not. You say that, but you don't know. What if I see you and realize you're not what I imagined? What if I see myself and realize I'm not who I thought I was? What if the whole world looks different than I've constructed in my mind, and I can't handle it? Then we'll figure it out together? Or what if I have the surgery and it doesn't work? What if I go through all of this and wake up still blind? But now I've also lost the peace I made with my condition. What if hope ends up being more destructive than acceptance ever was? Rashid had no answer for that. He could see the war playing out on her face, 15 years of hard-won acceptance, battling against the sudden possibility of everything changing. There's something else, she said quietly. What? If I can see again, if I become a normal, sighted woman, then what was the point of any of this? Your rebellion against your family, your dramatic marriage, your dare with Tariq, all of it loses its meaning if I'm not the blind woman who needed rescuing. Is that what you think this is about? Rescuing you? Isn't it? At least partly. Rashid was quiet for a long moment, forced to confront the uncomfortable truth in her words. Maybe it started that way. Maybe part of what attracted me to you was the drama of it all. But Amara, that's not why I married you. Then why did you marry me? Because you're the first person I've met in years who sees me clearly. Because you make me laugh. Because you challenge me to be better than I am. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human instead of just successful. And those things would still be true if I could see? Yes, but I understand why. You're scared, do you? You've spent 15 years being Amara, the blind artist. Strong, independent, inspiring. If you become Amara, the sighted woman, you lose that identity. You become ordinary in a way you haven't been since you were 17. Exactly. Her voice was barely audible. What if ordinary isn't enough? They drove home in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The possibility of Amara regaining her sight should have been cause for celebration, but instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether the leap would lead to flight or fall. That evening, they sat on their terrace overlooking the Gulf, sharing a quiet dinner that neither of them really tasted. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that Amara could only experience as warmth on her face, and the sound of Rashid's occasional, appreciative murmurs. "Tell me what it looks like," she said suddenly. "The sunset." "Yes, but describe it like you're seeing it for the first time, like you don't take it for granted." Rashid studied the horizon, trying to see it through her eyes. "The sun is this massive orange ball, but it's not harsh right now. It's soft, like looking at a candle through silk. The whole sky around it is on fire, orange and pink and purple, all bleeding into each other. The water is reflecting, all of it, so it's like there are two sunsets, one above and one below. And the colors are moving, constantly. Every few seconds, everything shifts slightly. Now there's more red, now more gold. It's like watching a painting that keeps painting itself." Amara smiled. "I've always wondered if I remember colors correctly. Whether the sunset I see in my mind matches what's actually there. What does your sunset look like?" "Warm. All the colors feel warm to me, even though I know some of them are supposed to be cool. I imagine it as liquid light pouring across the sky. That's not wrong. That's actually a beautiful way to see it. But it's not how it really looks. Who says what's real? Your sunset sounds just as valid as mine." They sat quietly watching, or in Amara's case experiencing, the light fade into evening. Finally, Amara spoke again. "If I have the surgery and if it works, this might be the last sunset I experience this way. Through sound and warmth and imagination instead of sight." That's one way to look at it. Another way is that it might be your last sunset before you get to experience them in a completely new way. Are you trying to convince me to have the surgery? I'm trying to convince you that whatever you decide, I'll support completely. If you want to have the surgery, I'll be there every step of the way. If you decide you're happy with your life as it is, I'll respect that too. And you won't wonder what if? I'll probably wonder what if no matter what you choose. But Amara, this isn't my decision to make. It's yours. You're the one who has to live with the consequences. That night, Amara lay awake beside her sleeping husband, weighing possibilities that felt too enormous to comprehend. She thought about the life she'd built, the skills she'd developed, the peace she'd made with her limitations. She thought about the art she created through touch alone, the way she'd learned to read people through their voices, the heightened senses that had become her superpowers. But she also thought about Rashid's face, which she'd never seen. About the colors she might not remember correctly, about the world that existed beyond her carefully constructed mental maps, about the possibility that sight might not diminish her other abilities, but enhance them. Most of all, she thought about fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of disappointment, fear of losing herself in the process of potentially finding a new version of herself. By morning, she had made her decision. "I want to do it," she told Rashid over breakfast, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was choosing. "I want to have the surgery." He set down his coffee cup, studying her face. "Are you sure?" "No. I'm terrified. But I've been thinking all night, and I realized something. 15 years ago, I lost my sight because I was running toward freedom, toward a better life. If I'm too afraid to take this chance now, then I'm running away from freedom. And I didn't survive everything I've survived just to spend the rest of my life being afraid." Rashid reached across the table and took her hands. "When do you want to schedule it?" "As soon as possible. Before I lose my nerve. And whatever happens, whatever you see or don't see when you wake up, you know I'll be there." "I know." She smiled, and for the first time since Dr. Chen had delivered her diagnosis, it reached her eyes. "Besides, I'm curious now. I want to see what you look like. I want to know if you're as handsome as you sound." "What if I'm not? Then I'll know you won me over with charm instead of looks. Which would actually be more impressive." 3 days. Later, they returned to Dr. Chen's office to schedule the surgery. As they signed consent forms and discussed recovery timelines, Rashid found himself thinking about transformation, not just Amara's potential physical transformation, but the ways they had both already changed since meeting each other. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. 7 days to prepare for the possibility that everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other might be different by the end of the month. 7 days to say goodbye to the woman who had learned to see clearly in the dark before, finding out who she might become in the light. The surgery took 4 hours and 23 minutes. Rashid knew this precisely because he had counted every minute, pacing the hospital corridor until the nursing staff gently suggested he sit down before he wore a path in the floor. When Dr. Chen finally emerged from the operating room, still in her surgical scrubs, her expression was carefully neutral. "The procedures went well," she said without preamble. "We successfully removed the cataracts from both eyes and performed corneal transplants. Mrs. Al-Mansouri is in recovery now." "And her vision?" Rashid asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. "We won't know anything definitive until the bandages come off in 3 days. But I'm cautiously optimistic. The optic nerves responded well to stimulation during surgery, which is a good sign." 3 days. 72 more hours of not knowing whether Amara would wake up to a world of light or remain in the darkness she'd known for 15 years. When they finally allowed him into the recovery room, Amara was awake but groggy, thick bandages covering both eyes. She turned her head toward the sound of his footsteps with the instinctive precision of someone who had navigated by sound for years. "How do you feel?" he asked, taking her hand carefully. "Like I've been hit by a truck," she mumbled, her voice thick from anesthesia. "But alive. Is it over?" "It's over. Dr. Chen says the surgery went perfectly. And now we wait. Now we wait." The next 3 days passed in a strange suspension of time. Amara remained in the hospital, her eyes protected by bandages, while Rashid maintained a vigil beside her bed. They talked more in those 3 days than they had in all their previous conversations combined, about childhood memories, dreams for the future, fears and hopes, and the small details of daily life they'd never shared. On the morning of the 4th day, Dr. Chen arrived with her usual professional calm, accompanied by 2 nurses and a cart of medical equipment. "Are you ready for this, Mrs. Al-Mansouri?" she asked. Amara's hand found Rashid's and squeezed tightly, as ready as anyone can be for their entire world to potentially change. "Remember, even if the surgery was successful, your vision will be blurry at first. Your brain needs time to relearn how to process visual information. Don't expect miracles immediately." "I understand." Dr. Chen began carefully removing the bandages, layer by layer, while Rashid held his breath. When the final gauze pad was lifted away, Amara's eyes were revealed, slightly swollen, red-rimmed, but unmistakably beautiful. "Can you see anything?" Dr. Chen asked. Amara blinked slowly, her eyes moving but unfocused. "Light," she whispered. "I can see light." "That's excellent. How about shapes, movement?" "Blurry shapes. Everything is. Bright. So bright." Tears began streaming down her cheeks. "Oh my God, I can see light." Dr. Chen smiled. "The brightness will normalize as your eyes adjust. Your vision should continue to improve over the next several weeks." She handed Amara a pair of dark sunglasses. "Wear these for now. We'll start you on a gradual exposure program." Over the following days, Amara's vision sharpened incrementally. First, she could distinguish between light and shadow. Then shapes began to emerge from the blur. The outline of the hospital window, the rectangular shape of the door, the general form of people moving around her room. The first time she could make out Rashid's face clearly, she stared at him for so long, he became self-conscious. "Is it what you expected?" he asked. "You're more beautiful than I imagined," she said simply. "But also different. I thought you would look more stern, I suppose, more intimidating. You have kind eyes. You can see my eyes clearly. I can see everything clearly. Your face, your expression, the way you smile with your whole face when you're happy." She reached up to touch his cheek. "I can see the scar near your hairline that you never told me about. Childhood accident. Fell off my bicycle when I was 7. I want to see everything. The sunset you described, the jewelry I made, my own reflection. I want to see colors the way they really are instead of the way I remembered them." That evening, they stood on the hospital balcony watching the sun set over Dubai. Amara wore her dark glasses, but could see well enough to make out the general shapes and colors of the scene Rashid had described to her weeks earlier. "It's different than I imagined," she said quietly. "Better or worse?" "Not better or worse, just different, more complex. I thought the colors would be separate, distinct, but they blend together. Everything connects to everything else. Are you disappointed?" "No, but I'm realizing that the sunset I created in my mind was just as beautiful as this one. They're both real, just different." 2 weeks later, Amara's vision had stabilized at nearly normal levels. Dr. Chen pronounced the surgery a complete success, and they were finally able to go home to their life together. But coming home revealed new challenges neither of them had anticipated. Amara found herself overwhelmed by visual stimuli, the patterns on rugs she'd walked across dozens of times, the colors of walls she'd only known by texture, the constant movement of a world she'd previously experienced as static. "I keep getting distracted," she confessed to Rashid one morning. "I'll be trying to make coffee, and then I notice the way the light reflects off the kitchen faucet, and suddenly I'm standing there for 10 minutes just watching water drip." "Is that bad?" "It's exhausting. I never realized how much energy sight requires. My brain is working overtime trying to process all this new information." More challenging was the way her relationship with her art had changed. For 15 years, Amara had created jewelry through touch alone, her fingers knowing exactly how each piece should feel. Now, seeing the visual result of her work, she found herself second-guessing choices she'd made instinctively. "This bracelet," she said, holding up a piece she'd completed the week before her surgery. "I thought the silver and copper complemented each other, but seeing them together, the colors clash. Or maybe you're seeing them with different eyes now. Maybe the way they felt right to your fingers is just as valid as the way they look to your eyes. How can both be true? Maybe truth isn't singular. Maybe there are as many ways to see beauty as there are people to see it." The real test came when Amara returned to the gold souk for the first time since regaining her sight. She'd been nervous about going back, unsure how she would feel about the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. Walking through the marketplace she'd navigated by sound and smell and memory for years, Amara was struck by how different everything looked from what she'd imagined. The vendor stalls were smaller than she'd thought, more cramped. The colors were more vibrant, but also more chaotic. The place that had felt organized and familiar in her mental map seemed overwhelming and foreign to her eyes. "It's not what I expected," she told Rashid as they walked slowly through the corridors she'd once known by heart. "How so?" "Smaller, more cluttered. I had this image in my mind of spacious pathways and orderly displays. The reality is more." She paused, searching for the right word. "More human, I suppose, messier and more beautiful at the same time." They stopped at the spot where she used to set up her jewelry display, now occupied by a young man selling spices. Amara stared at the patch of ground where she'd spent countless hours, where she'd first met Rashid, where her life had changed forever. "Do you miss it?" Rashid asked. "The simplicity of how you experienced this place before?" "Sometimes. But I'm also grateful I can see it now. Both versions are true. The one I knew through touch and sound, and the one I see with my eyes. I don't have to choose between them." That evening, they had dinner at the same Lebanese restaurant where Rashid had first proposed. Sitting across from each other at the same table, Amara could now see Rashid's expressions as he spoke, could watch the play of emotions across his face that she'd only been able to hear in his voice before. "I have something to tell you," Rashid said as they finished their main course. "Good something or bad something? Good something. The board meeting I've been dreading, the one where they were going to try to remove me as CEO, it happened yesterday, and they voted to keep me, unanimously." Amara set down her fork in surprise. "What changed?" "Apparently our story has been good for business. The telecommunications deal with Ethiopia that my father thought we'd lost because of our marriage. It's moving forward. The Ethiopian government specifically requested to work with the company whose CEO had married an Ethiopian refugee and helped her regain her sight. They see it as a sign of respect for their people. So your rebellion became good business after all." "It seems that way. But more importantly, my father called me yesterday. He wants to meet you properly. He wants to apologize for the things he said." "And how do you feel about that?" "I feel like maybe people can change. Maybe families can heal. Maybe taking a risk for love doesn't always end in disaster." 6 months later, Amara stood in the workshop behind their new home, her hands working silver wire, while her eyes watched the intricate patterns take shape. She had learned to create jewelry that pleased both her sense of touch and her newly regained sight, pieces that were beautiful in multiple ways. The workshop was filled with natural light, and she could see everything clearly, the gleam of metal, the subtle color variations in different stones, the way shadows shifted across her work surface as the day progressed. But she also still worked with her eyes closed sometimes, trusting her fingers to guide her the way they had for 15 years. "I thought I might find you here," Rashid said, appearing in the doorway. "I'm working on something special." She held up a pendant, an intricate silver tree with tiny gemstones as leaves. "It's for your mother, a peace offering. She'll love it. She's already planning to introduce you as her daughter-in-law at the charity gala next month, by the way. I think you've won her over completely. And your father? Still suspicious, but warming up. He admitted yesterday that you're smarter than most of his business associates. High praise from Rashid Al-Mansouri, the highest." Amara set down her work and turned to face her husband. Even after months of sight, she still sometimes marveled at being able to see his expressions, to watch the way his face changed when he smiled or frowned or concentrated. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't had the surgery?" she asked. "If I'd chosen to stay blind?" "Sometimes. But I think we would have been happy either way. Maybe differently happy, but happy. I think so too. But I'm glad I chose this." Not because sight is better than blindness, but because choosing change over fear is better than choosing safety over growth. Any regrets? Only one. What's that? I regret that it took me 32 years to learn that love isn't about becoming what someone else needs you to be. It's about finding someone who sees you clearly, with or without sight, and chooses to love all of you anyway. Rashid crossed the workshop and took her hands, silver dust and all. For what it's worth, I learned the same lesson. I spent so many years trying to be the son my family wanted, the executive my board expected, the man society demanded. With you, I finally learned how to be myself, even when yourself included marrying a blind street vendor on a dare. Especially then. That evening, they walked along Jumeirah Beach, watching the sunset paint the sky in the same brilliant colors Rashid had described to her months earlier. Amara could see it all now. The orange ball of the sun, the fire across the sky, the double sunset reflecting in the water. But she could also experience it the way she had when she was blind, through the warmth on her skin, the sound of waves, the salt breeze that carried the scent of jasmine from nearby gardens. "It's perfect," she said, squeezing Rashid's hand. The sunset? Everything. This moment, this life, the fact that we found each other against all odds, the fact that love really can change everything if you're brave enough to let it. As they stood there together, watching the day fade into night, neither of them thought about the dare that had started their story, or the scandal that had surrounded their marriage, or the challenges they'd overcome to get to this moment. They thought about the future they would build together, one where sight and blindness, wealth and poverty, tradition and rebellion were all just different ways of experiencing the same fundamental truth, that love, when it's real, doesn't just survive transformation. It creates it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it helps you see clearly for the first time in your life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.